women away, managing levels of intimacy in our female relationships and our businesses and our lives in general in relationship to our values. I really wanted to talk about this because I hear from women all the time that say that they are really looking for like-minded community, and they're really looking for women who really share their core values, and that there's no one who feels the way they feel, or that they've had, relationships destroyed. And I just want to share a personal story in this regard and really talk about levels of intimacy and how I manage this topic. Okay, what if I told you that one of my closest friends in my life, that we very strongly disagreed about one of my core values for years? This is a friend of mine who, she married me and my husband. She lived with me and my family. We were very close. And guess what? We were able to maintain and grow that intimacy while actually being on really polar opposite ends of a feminist spectrum. What we disagreed upon specifically was my stance on transgender ideology and how I really didn't believe that it supported my perspective of feminist values. But she had a completely opposite perspective. And you know what? We talked about it. And 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 we really spent, on average, 2 years, a lot of which we lived in the same house, discussing this and hearing from one another, and really honestly just being in respect of one another, not assuming that the way that one of us really believed or oriented as to who we were as women and really to our values in the world was inherently better than the other. I bring this up because at no point did I really feel particularly swayed. I felt very grounded in my beliefs. But what I did find really compelling was how and why she came to her beliefs and what that had to do with who she was as a woman, and vice versa. And guess what? Years later, we now are still really tight, and we've both really opened up in our perspectives, and I think it's really healthy. I won't say that I was necessarily swayed, though, and I think this is what's really important, is I have been able to really sort of step back from the intensity with which I have sort of felt that an adherence to my values was a prerequisite for a close female friendship, and instead feel very grounded in my values and beliefs and be able to absolutely have deep and close and intimate relationship with other women that don't actually share those values in common. So I wanted to bring up that there are different levels of intimacy, right? There's different levels of intimacy that we have with other women and that we have with the women in our business. And I have really deep friendships with women who don't share my core values. And that might not work for everyone, but it certainly works for me, and I think it is certainly possible. I also have other friendships with women who don't share my values, but they are not really as intimate, or maybe they share some values, some core values, but not others. And those friendships are maybe less intimate. I also have a whole variety of friendships with women who actually do share my core values, but we're not at a deep level of intimacy. And I think understanding this relationship between values adherence and intimacy is something that we can all really start to sort of unpack and discover for ourselves. I then bring this in relationship to my clients and my business. I absolutely have some clients and women that I serve that I truly love and feel like I have absolute levels of intimacy with, and I love these women and feel close to them. And then I have women that we don't have a close relationship. It's not really intimate in that way. It is more professional, but still loving and supportive. And I have found that in my personal practice, that doesn't actually mirror our values coordination. So I definitely have women that I have felt very intimately connected with and really supported in my business, who I either didn't know their core values because that's not what we were talking about, or we actually didn't agree on our core values, but we had a sense of mutual respect, right? And that allowed for this level of intimacy. I've also had a lot of women, arguably more, that we did really have the same core values. That's why they were attracted to my work. That's why they were in my care practice, right? But as we got to know each other, there was boundaries that were set up largely by me or maybe by them, that kept the level of intimacy that everyone was comfortable with. And why I bring this up is this idea that we ultimately will create intimacy when we have values overlap, I think is maybe an aspect of it, but not necessarily true. And I used to think that if I really wanted to create either, if I wanted my business to flourish, if I wanted to create close relationships, that I needed to really be upfront about what I believed and why, right? And have that be sort of the prerequisite for this relationship building. But I honestly no longer do that. I no longer feel that way. Because when I did, I felt that I inadvertently pushed women away that I actually would have really liked and gotten along with. And I felt that I put up barriers that didn't necessarily need to be there. And for me, what that was about was largely due to fear of being in what I perceived as conflict with other women and not really being able to navigate that in a way that maintained a sense of respect, right? So if we're going to bring this back to communication skills, the better I was able to really feel grounded in my values, feel like I didn't need other people to agree with me in order for me to really feel confident in what I believed, and was able to communicate those values in a way that wasn't attempting to convince or prove other women that they were right, and also wasn't trying to change their mind. The more that I was able to really cultivate those skills, the less I felt that I had to weed out other women based on being like, this is what I believe, and if you believe me, you're with me, and if you're not, if you don't have these values, then we're not going to get along, right? I didn't have to do that anymore because I actually felt that I had the skills to be able to navigate that values divergence in a healthy and skillful way that allowed me to still build loving relationships with other women despite our differences, right? This isn't to say that I don't love having women that I agree with and that we see the world the same way. Of course I do. And guess what? Those are a lot of my closest friends. But I also have examples where that's not the case. And I didn't used to have any examples like that because I really believed that values alignment was the core principle. And for me, that was really limiting. So I know I hear from a lot of you that feel like, I want to run my business and I want to center women, but there's no one who thinks the way I do, or I really want to start a women's circle. I hear this one a lot. I really want to start a women's circle in my community, but there's not like the crunchy homegirls, or there's not the women who would be into that. And in my personal experience, that wasn't actually the requirement. I didn't know really any women who would be into it, but I was able to communicate its value and share why this might benefit them and really be warm and welcoming, truly, and not challenged and triggered by someone else's belief system. So, therefore, I was able to really gather these community vibes, out of which I then built not only a thriving women's circle community with hundreds of women that came through over the years, but also a thriving practice. But even more so than that, I was able to build core friendships and really expand my views as a person while still being grounded in really the ideologies and the values that I hold, but not feel like I have to grip to them so tightly that I'm inflexible and it limits the amount of loving relationships I can have. So, I've said this before, I'll say it again. I love women more than I love feminism. And what I mean by that is if I find that in pursuit of my feminist values, it's actually making me less interested in finding closeness and uplifting other women, then I feel like I have missed the mark in some way, right? And I really believe that despite sort of my clear values orientation, if I'm able to offer like loving and kindness and support for other women, even if their values diverge from mine, that is actually creating the feminist liberation that I want my feminism to be based on. Let's not confuse, that doesn't mean that I don't actually have really core backbone values that I believe and that I want to put forth in the world as a woman. I do that. You can read my content. It's very clear. But I don't, at this point, allow that to get in the way of loving and supporting the women in my life, because I think that that's where we've really missed the mark. So again, I love women more than I love my feminist values. Feminist values because my feminist values really lie in loving women. So I hope this was helpful, and if you're interested in more of this content and really how to feel clear in your values, clear in your articulation, clear in your concept of your own female body, and how that relates to the women in your community more broadly, we still have about a week left exactly. Yeah, 1 week and 1 day left until the doors for women's work close. And I think we have 3 more spots left as of now. So if you're interested and you've been feeling the call, please join us, and you can pop your comments below. All right, we'll talk soon.